This podcast is brought to you by the Clare and Gilbert Valleys Council. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Clare Valley Podcast, bringing you a snapshot of all the latest news from the Clare and Gilbert Valleys Council over the past month. I'm your host, Annabelle Homer. And without a doubt, elected councillors are in budget mode, with discussions dominating the latest council meetings. You'll get an overall picture of the draft budget for the next financial year. And how are council's financials? Are we expecting another deficit or a surplus? And most importantly, what will you be paying in rates? Also, have you always wanted to write your own novel but just don't know how to start or where to start? In this episode, you'll hear from Mark McAvaney, who recently launched his first novel, For Everything a Time.
I still can't get my head around it, if I'm being really honest. And I don't know how to articulate that. Like, when I see the airport, when I haven't gone looking at it, looking for it, and it's there, then I just get this rush of adrenaline. But when I've been walking into a bookshop knowing they've got it, it's just, I don't know, I can't quite. And even sitting here today in the library here in Clare, where I grew up, where I used to sit and read books and borrow books, it blows my mind.
Once a Clare Valley boy, now living the life in London, he'll reveal his life as a debut author. Also, the Clare Valley wine and grape industry recently celebrated its Night of Nights with its Hall of Fame Gala dinner, where they announced its newest Hall of Fame legend inductees and award winners, an event that only happens every 10 years. I'll bring you a snippet of what occurred that night. But let's get the latest from Council headquarters with CEO Dr. Helen Macdonald. Okay, Dr. Helen Macdonald, a special council meeting was held at the end of May and some major decisions were made. The draft budget for 2024 and 2025 and the annual business plan have both been endorsed by Council. Can we just run through what's the overall picture of the budget for 2024-25?
Basically, what we're looking at is an income of just a tad over 21 million. So that's taking into account all the various sources of income we have. And then we've got a total expenses of just under 22 million. Our expenses are a little higher than our total income, which means we're looking at an operating deficit of 863,000. So it's smaller than the deficit that we have for the current year, but still it is a deficit.
And what was the deficit for the current year?
I think it's looking like it's going to be 1.2 million.
So at this stage, looking at an $863,000 deficit, is that a healthy deficit?
Well, in terms of our long-term financial plan, it's expected, and it's good to see that it's lower than the previous year, because we want to start working towards having small surpluses, because you can build to go again, as they say. Having a couple of years of surpluses means you're in a good position to then take up loans and pay those down as you construct that infrastructure.
Let's talk about charges, individual charges for ratepayers. Firstly, what are the expected charges for rubbish collection?
The rubbish or waste charges that are in the draft budget are $255, so that's per household.
And what about community wastewater?
In the draft budget, it's set at $496.
The waste charges have gone up by 6.25%, a little more than CPI, and there's been no increase to the Clare Waste Management Scheme charge. Let's talk about rates. What a ratepayer is expected to pay this coming financial year?
Overall, on the rates we're raising is a 4.3% increase plus growth, which is at this point in time sitting at 1.69%. So it's a very small growth. That will end up with a rate increase of 4.4% roughly. I mean, that may change because we have to take the latest figures that are put out by the Valuer General, which will be in June sometime. Those numbers always move around every year because of having to take into account the most up-to-date figures that the Valuer General puts out.
And was there much discussion over possibly increasing the rates a little bit more, considering Council is running at a deficit?
Well, administration put to Council a draft budget, the very first version of the budget it put to Council, which had a proposed rate increase of 5.3% plus growth. So a Council's come in with 4.3, which is the March CPI figure.
What are the differentials then between residential, primary production and commercial?
So we take residential as the base rate. So that rate, which is 0.3889 cents in the dollar. So then commercial is 36% more than the base rate, which is 0.5289 cents in the dollar. So commercial and industry are the same, and vacant land, that sits at the base rate as well. And the big difference is primary production, which has a 43.2% discount on the base rate. Primary producers will be paying 0.220729 cents in the dollar. So, substantially less than what the base rate or the residential rate is. That has remained pretty much the same.
What is the minimum rate?
Minimum rate is set at $755.
And to be clear, what is the minimum rate? Who does that relate to?
Anybody that pays rates, that is the minimum that they have to pay. So if you had a property that, whatever the value is it, when you apply the residential rate, for example, your rates actually came in, let's say, for argument's sake, at $500, then you still have to pay $755. That's the base rate at which the minimum rate that anybody can pay. So everybody has to pay that, and then depending on the value of property, will go up from there.
To clarify those details on differentials relating to commercial or industry, owners will be paying 36% more than the base rate of 3.888950, and primary production will pay a discounted rate of 43.25% of the base rate. Let's talk about some of the concerns by the Audit and Risk Committee. They raised concerns about the reduction in expenditure on capital renewal projects and the lack of consideration given by elected members to professional advice by consultants and staff in relation to road sealing. They said that professional advice was being ignored. What's the council or the elected members' response to this?
The independent members of the Audit Committee did not make those comments in the absence of nothing. They made those comments in the context of a report that was provided to them by administration, which outlined the risk of a decision that Council had taken at its meeting on the 29th of May. It's in relation to the draft budget. So there was a whole lot of roads, Woolshed Flat Road, Annie's Lane, Wendouree Road East, Winery Road, Stockport Road, Brothers Hill Road, Mintero Road, Pioneer Avenue, all had substantive reductions to their budget, so that they went from 90,000 to 10,000, 70,000 to 15. So there was a huge reduction, basically saying we're not doing a reseal. Council wants us just to do repairs, and that the savings from taking that decision would be for $1 million to go towards resealing a brand new road. That road hasn't been identified. Council noted the report that came from the Audit Committee, but they did not make any decision to change how they want to proceed with the budget.
ESCOSA, which is the Essential Services Commission of South Australia, recently conducted a report providing advice on the Clare and Gilbert Valleys Council's long-term financial performance. Now, based on its findings, the council's current and projected financial performance is potentially unsustainable. It's taking into account council's forecast of moderate expense growth over the next 10 years and planned average rate increase of 3.3% per property over this period. So is the council financially viable?
It's financially viable. They're talking about over the longer term, and it's all in relation to council's assets, plural. So have we got more assets than we can afford to maintain and replace? That's the nub of it. And ESCOSA is suggesting that we are not in a good position, and particularly by doing things like adding new sealed roads, it's adding to the asset base. So you're increasing the number of assets that you have to maintain, and expensive assets. Now, you can deal with adding new assets if you're prepared to sell off some of the existing ones that you don't use, or you downgrade them from the current service level that they're provided at. You know, a sealed road becomes an unsealed road. Sell off buildings that aren't being used, for example.
Which is what you've been trying to do with
Indeed,
the local halls,
Yeah, so they're completely underutilised, and the number of public meeting spaces for the population is disproportionate. But it's also difficult because you've got so many small communities. If we were a metro council where you have people living in much closer proximity, then it makes more sense. That is essentially the challenge that faces council. And Escosa made some interesting observations, but also contradictory in the sense that they were suggesting that our rate rises should be maintained at CPI, which when doing your long-term financial plan is pretty difficult. You can only guess or take advice from the Reserve Bank, etc. But they have also suggested that we need to get the income to maintain our assets. However, I don't think they were thinking that, just keep growing your asset base and grow your income or, increase rates to cover it, because that ultimately, that's just not sustainable. You have to be prudent about what you add on and be looking at what you take off at the other side. So, because we don't have massive population growth. We do have some growth, but it's very small. Like for this last 12 months, there's only been 12 additional properties, because that's how growth is calculated. It's not growing the population, it's growing the number of rateable properties. And there's only been 12 in the last 12 months. So, if you think of the amount of increase in rates from that, that's not going to be a huge amount of money, depending on the sort of property, but it's, somewhere probably between $15,000 and $20,000 max. Don't go far. So, you have to be very careful about increasing your asset base. So it's the number of assets you've got to maintain. That's really what it comes down to.
What do you think council needs to do to reduce its assets or to reduce its expenses to ensure that it has a healthy financial performance over the next 10 years?
It's going to be really difficult because we've got a significant expenditure that we need to undertake on stormwater. I mean, council, we had a good just general discussion about what the risk level would be, for example, of the Clare community in terms of building a $12-15 million dam as opposed to doing some work on the Hutt River to facilitate the flow of floodwaters. So how much flooding is the community prepared to tolerate and at what frequency? That is the kind of thinking that council needs to do in terms of which then converts into what kind of expenditure to deal with stormwater. So that's a kind of a challenge that council's got to face. The Clare CWMS is pretty much at capacity, so that's another significant expenditure. That will get challenged through the people that are tapped into the CWMS. So that's not a cost that is borne by all the ratepayers, but nevertheless it's something that needs to be taken into account. I think it's probably looking carefully at our road assets and the level of maintenance that we have on that, and particularly in this last year when it's been dry for basically the first 6 months of the year, is dust complaints, and the first thing people say is, "Oh, can you seal my road?" Well, yeah, we can seal your road, but are you prepared for your rates to go up to cover the cost of that, because that will add to depreciation. So they're all the things. It's really understanding that if you live in the district, what the level of service you can expect to get, because council's purse is not ever ending and it has all these assets, so it has to maintain them.
Helen also mentions not only do the dry periods affect our road assets, but also regular flooding affects the life of those affected assets.
And there's also a consequence around valuation as well, in terms of historically how well councils looked after its assets. If you have really good maintenance programs, you'll get the full life of, generally speaking, you'll get the full life of the asset. If you're not having really good maintenance programs, then the full life of your asset will not be sustained.
Well, how's council's maintenance programs?
I would suggest that this council historically, and I'm talking going back decades, has probably skimped on maintenance. So then when it comes to replacement costs, they're probably greater than what they should be. But where this council has been pretty good is the maintenance of its unsealed road network. Most of those assets are lasting for their life. They're not. We've got a couple that are not. That's if you've got a really good maintenance program, you are looking at when your assets are failing. You're doing more frequent maintenance than necessary, and therefore you realise there's something not right about that asset, so it needs to be looked at and work undertaken to repair what it is that's failing.
So overall, Dr. Helen Macdonald, is council happy with this current draft budget that's now going to go out for public consultation?
Well, I can only assume that they're happy because they were
signed off on it.
Yeah, they were prepared to adopt it when I was not expecting them to adopt it. I was expecting a bit more argy-bargy around some of it.
In particular, which bit did you expect argy-bargy?
I thought that there might have been some more discussion around some of the items that came in where they removed the sealed road and we've got in the budget a yet-to-be identified road that's going to be sealed. So we've got $1 million expenditure with nothing identified for that expenditure to take place. There was an allocation of $120,000 to the Manura Town Hall, which came out of the blue. I thought that might have got questioned. There was certainly some discussion around the refurbishment of the Riverton Town Hall. That's not going to happen because at this point in time we're not successful in getting a grant for that. But we don't know. That's not confirmed. Certainly some things that individual councillors kind of questioning, but they were, much to my surprise, happy to adopt the draft budget and business plan. And so, out for consultation and, encouraging people to give us feedback.
How do you feel about the upcoming financial year? On a national scale, we hear about the current financial crisis that everybody's sort of feeling. How do you think our little local council community is going to cope in the next 12 months?
I imagine that things are going to be fairly tight for people. So I suspect that seeing a 4.3% rate rise will be a relief to many people, particularly when you've got many other councils are in double digits, like 10%. Burnside is at 14 point something percent. And, that's...
What about other regional councils?
Most of them are well above 5%. We won't be certainly not the only one, but most councils are well above 5% rate increase. One of the few that wouldn't be is Barossa. They've got a formula of how they operate. They've also got substantive growth, which probably helps them in one sense.
Well, Helen Macdonald, thank you very much for the update, and we'll catch up again once the budget has been finalised by the community.
Yeah, indeed. We'll put information out in the Plains Producer on social media, newsletters, etc., because there will be a meeting where if anybody wants to make a verbal submission to council, they're welcome to come in, or if they write in a submission but then actually want to speak to it as well, then they will be able to do that as well. But we would expect by the middle of July that council, so probably at the July meeting, we would anticipate that council will actually adopt the budget.
Copies of the draft plan will be available on its website, in offices and libraries throughout this period. Consultation begins from the 14th of June until close of business on Monday, the 8th of July. Congratulations to the newest Hall of Fame legend inductees and award winners that were announced at the Clare Valley's Wine Hall of Fame Gala dinner. Held once every decade, this event, which was held at O'Leary Walker Wines, celebrates the outstanding achievement and innovation in grape growing, wine production, marketing and regional ambassadorship. This year, 5 legends were inducted and 4 awards were presented. Here's a snippet of what took place on the night. In this audio, you'll hear from Katie Spain, who's the MC of the evening, wine writer Nick Ryan, who provides a sum of the background of the inductees. The first legend to be inducted is a posthumous recognition. Rolly Burks from Wendouree. Lita Brady, the current custodian of Wendouree, accepted his award.
Wendouree is considered by many to be among the most beautiful and distinctive wines this country has to offer. Wendouree wines from Clare Valley's old vines remain amongst Australia's most sought in the 21st century.
Oh, thank you very much. I'd really like to thank the panel. I think Rolly would have been truly honoured, and of course it's deserved for a lifetime of hard work. Thank you very much.
Our next legend to be inducted into the Hall of Fame is Peter Barry.
It was fun. You got together with your mates and you're going to change the perception of the Clare Valley to the world.
So our next legend to be inducted into the Hall of Fame
This region I've enjoyed for so much time, all the time I've been here, in fact. And I just hope it just keeps on growing. I'm very comfortable in my own mind about how we're here and why we're here and what we've achieved. And I'm very, very proud of my family.
It is a pleasure to announce Andrew Pike to be inducted into the 2024 Hall of Fame.
The wine industry is a lifestyle. You really have to embrace that. 360 degrees. You can't be a part-time participant, you know. If you're in it for the right reasons, you really got to embrace it. 360 degrees. And the challenge for our kids is to carry on that mental approach to the business, and they have to want it. Otherwise, what's the point?
Stephanie Toole.
I purchased the Mount Horrocks railway station in 1998. It was really run down, on the verge of collapse, and have gone through that journey of renovating and planting a beautiful garden, parkland area outside, and then the final, I guess, chapter was the biodynamic herb garden, which I planted last year, and that ties in the vineyard and my philosophy on chemical-free, and just really has a nice synergy about it. The most pleasurable thing is when your customers come into cellar door and they taste the wine and they just love what you're doing. That is the best thing ever.
Recapping, you heard from Lita Brady from Windaree, Peter Barry from Jim Barry Wines, Neil Paulette from Paulette Wines, Andrew Pike from Pike Wines, and Stephanie O'Toole from Mount Horrocks Wines. While we're talking about awards, a big congrats to Borough for winning Tiny Tourism Town of the Year and also the People's Choice Award at the Hello SA Top Tourism Town Awards. The other finalists were Mintero, Limestone Coast, Ardrossan, Coffin Bay and Hawker. Have you ever wanted to write your own novel but don't know how to start? Also, how do you navigate the publishing world? Mark McAvaney is a new Australian author who grew up in the Clare Valley, who now lives in London and has just published his first book, For Everything a Time. This interview isn't about the book. It's all about writing the book, the process, the constant editing and the back and forth with publishers. He was recently in Clare as part of his Australian book tour. A nostalgic time for Mark as people came from across the region to hear about his new book and his journey to becoming a published author. Enjoy this chat with Mark McAvaney, who is still coming to terms with his celebrity status. I'll just get you to say your name and how you'd like me to introduce you so I can just get your levels first.
Mark McAvaney. You can call me Mark.
Published author? Oh, you got to spreak yourself.
Oh, no, but I feel like I'm embarrassed. Someone called me a celebrity. I stopped at Sydney Airport yesterday and they had my book. I'm finding the airport's the most exciting because you don't really go, especially to the airport, to a bookshop. So when you see it there, you just get this, I get this hyper little boy buzz. And I took it up the counter and I was talking to the girl and I said, I've always thought it might be exciting to work in an airport. And she was, oh, no, you get used to it, it gets boring. But except when you have a celebrity come in with their book.
And I've seen some authors go into a bookshop and rearrange the books to make sure their book is nice and prominent.
I couldn't possibly comment. Is that going to air? I couldn't possibly comment. Maybe I have.
You're from the Clare Valley, but you live in London and have been living in London for quite a while.
Yeah.
How many years are we talking?
22, 23 years now.
Okay, so what have you been doing over there over that period of time?
I like to tell people I'm on a working holiday because that's what I originally went for a year, 18 months, just to work, to holiday and work at the same time. Yeah. But opportunities came up, work came up, you meet friends, you get roots down, you realise you haven't seen as much as you want to do. You just sort of slow down a bit and then all of a sudden, 2 decades later, you're still on a holiday, but doing more working than holiday.
What's your full-time job over there?
My full-time, I'm actually working part-time now as an accountant, but I'm working for a little publishing company which does art books. So I'm still involved with publishing, but accounting pays a little bit more than writing sometimes.
So where did the idea of writing a book come from? Has this been a lifelong dream?
It has. And I really have only started to realise that as I've been talking about this in the last year or so. So when I was at school, I just loved English. I was always very academic. I was good at numbers. I was good at English, science, all of that type of stuff. Art I was quite good at. Wasn't good at sport. But I used to write little stories, write little plays. When I was 12, I started a novel about like Martin Smithfield. And I can't remember the name, but he was like, he and his mates were going to go off and solve crimes and do all that type of stuff. So it's always been there. I probably came from that environment and that time where you got a proper job. You didn't go.
And you went into accountancy.
Well, yeah, my mum was a bookkeeper and accountant for the council here in Clare. That was a solid career. You get a trade. I mean, it didn't have to be accounting. No one, mum and dad didn't mind. They just wanted me to have something behind them.
Yep.
And so I went into that. But then I actually took a year off of that because I knew my heart was never in it. But I went around in circles. And so thankfully, being an accountant can pay the bills, and I was able to write part-time.
When did the switch kind of flick and you thought, okay, now's the time, I'm going to write a book? What was the trigger point there?
That's a great question. I can't remember an exact trigger point, but I think it comes from not being fulfilled creatively. You'd go in, I'd look at my spreadsheets, I'd help organise stuff, but I actually wasn't doing any creating. I was watching other people do the creating. So I had this idea for a novel, and I started writing it, and I enrolled in a creative writing course in 2014, 2015. And that was a course where everyone went in with a novel that they'd either started, someone finished it, they were at different places, and you would go from there and write and turn it into a full-fledged novel. The course that I did was actually run by who I ended up working for, Curtis Brown Creative. So it was actually a select course. So you actually had to submit work, and on the merit of that, you were selected. So even just getting accepted onto the course was quite validating for me because I didn't even tell anybody I was writing back in those days.
Why not?
I think because it was sort of a private thing, and you're like, oh, who do you think you are being a writer, or you're not going to be any good at that, how ridiculous, that type of thing. So it was just one of those things. So when I started that course, I got into it. That was very validating. And then it was just so fun to sit around and actually talk about the art of writing with people. How do you do it? What do you do? And you start to read a book and critique it and think, well, that's not working for me. This is working. How can I, make my own work better? Because that's what I've found. My work gets better when I get told what's wrong with it. Yeah.
So this concept or idea that you had that got you into this course in the first place is obviously the current book that you have just published. So the idea that you had in your head at that time, how long had that been swirling around before you actually put that down onto paper and got into that course?
I should go back one step. Back in about 2008, I wrote a screenplay, which didn't go anywhere except my drawer, but that actually was the outline for this novel. I remember one of the things you hear about, I've always been an overthinker, and you hear about like accidents on TV, and you hear all these news and different things. And at some point, I had that thing, that will stay with them for the rest of their lives. And that actually became the basis, that thought for this novel about making peace with the past. What our past, stays with us. Mm. And so a long time, really.
So how long did it take you to write the book?
I think I was about 30,000 halfway through it in 2015. Then by the middle of 2018, I'd had a draft done, which was a good enough for someone to read.
So 3 years. And then I'm fascinated about the relationship that you have with your publisher and the toing and froing and editing and copywriting, all that type of thing that goes on between an author and a publisher. Did that just drive you nuts? Because that went on for some time as well.
Well, even before that, because I had a good agent, she actually wanted to get it better before she even sent it to people. So I had notes from my agent first to rewrite, and then her assistant as well. So that probably took about another year or so. Then I had some family stuff and sort of had a year off probably without looking at it. And then it went to the publisher, I can't remember when now. COVID slowed everything down, of course, as well.
And the agent chose the publisher?
We sent it out to a few people. I did get rejections, but that's just par for the course. And we had about 3 publishers interested in the end.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. And then I had a specific publisher with Ultima Press, and then I got more notes. And that's when the fun began. I mean, the great notes, like really, really pushed me. And I'd met her when I was back in Sydney. And when I went back to London, I went off to a cabin by myself for about 5 days just to digest and sit and think.
So how much toing and froing was there? Did it get to a point where you had done so much editing and so much rewriting that you thought, okay, this is it, this must be it, and it wasn't?
Every time I did a draft, I thought, this has got to be it. I can't give any more. And all you really want, when you see the email come up, you want to read, brilliant, don't change a thing. Does not happen. Every time. Like, you cross your fingers. So quite often she probably wouldn't give the solution, but she could tell what was not working. And then ultimately it was still up to me. So one of the things was this book is a dual narrative with two main characters in two time frames, in two timelines. But we actually cut one of the characters' timeline, his voice. So I probably chopped about 20,000 words, 30,000 words.
Is that a lot?
It was probably about a third of the book. So I was able to rewrite some of it from the other character, but then other parts have just gone.
Do you feel sometimes that it took away sort of the sense of the story?
Well, that's half the trick. You don't want to lose the sense of the story in doing anything like this. So that's hard because you think, okay, well, I could solve this problem, but it's not actually going to help. But my editor-publisher was always on about keeping the heart in it and and if anything, if I did sway, she actually brought me back again. And that happened a couple of times. She was like, well, you're losing that now. And so then you go, okay, right. And you just have to keep going.
Do you sometimes just want to put it in the drawer and just don't look at it for a while?
Oh, yeah. Look, my advice to anyone writing a novel is definitely do it, but don't make it too long because you're going to have to reread this thing over and over and over again.
Start with the children's book.
Yeah. Don't write a War and Peace is my advice.
What do you base your writing on? Are there specific authors that you love and love their style that you've sort of adapted to their style as well?
So I have a few books that I like to reread. When I read, sometimes afterwards, I start narrating in my own head. I don't know why I do that. So I always was a Tim Winton fan, particularly Cloud Street. I've read that a few times. Evie Wild's All the Birds Singing, I think, is just a masterpiece on how to write. It won the Miles Franklin probably about a decade ago now. It's relatively short, but her use of language and style and character is just so strong. I would just read that, I'll highlight and think, how can I steal that without her recognising that I've stolen it? She's amazing. And I loved Richard Flanagan's Narrow Road to the Deep North. I've got a couple of more of his to read. I think there's a particular Australian style of writing that can capture the countryside and the people just so exquisitely and succinctly in such a short amount of words. So I love reading people like that. Yeah, that do that.
Even though you're working as an accountant as well, part-time, full-time, when do you slot in your writing? Is it at night? Is it first thing in the morning, at 3 o'clock in the morning? Do you wake up and go, I've got a great idea? How do you fit it into your life?
If you had asked teenage Mark, or told teenage Mark that he would be getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to write, he would have said, you idiot. But when I was working full-time, that's what I would do. So I'd get up at 5 o'clock. I would catch the train into London where I worked, which was about 40 minutes. I'd write on the train, I'd go to the gym, then I'd sit in a coffee shop and write. So I've become a morning writer. I just find life hasn't gotten in the way. I haven't, had other problems and stuff come up. I can just wake up fresh. My head is fresh. And I'll write in the morning for a good 3-4 hours and then get stumped and then give it a go. Yeah. And even if I'm not writing, I still wake up at 5 o'clock sometimes. And that is very annoying. I
love the comment when you said sometimes I have a plan to write that day and then I just sit there and stare at my screen and not write a word all day.
Yeah. So, for me, writing's a lot about thinking. You just get the fear sometimes of putting the wrong word down, which is ridiculous. It's still a mental thing. Yeah. Or you go off and do something else. You go off for a jog, you go off for go for a walk, and all of a sudden it comes to you when you're not realising it. Your subconscious pulls it in.
So it took about 6 years.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, maybe 5 years maybe.
How does it feel now that you're on your publishing tour? You've been travelling all over the place, all around Australia. How does it feel that you've got to this point?
I still can't get my head around it, if I'm being really honest. And I don't know how to articulate that. Like, when I see the airport, when I haven't gone looking for it, and it's there, then I just get this rush of adrenaline. But when I've been walking into a bookshop knowing they've got it, it's just, I don't know, I can't quite. And even sitting here today in the library here in Clare, where I grew up, where I used to sit and read books and borrow books, it blows my mind. It really, really does. I really just can't.
And what reception have you received from people in Clare?
Oh, Clare have been amazing. I really, this morning, I just wanted to cry at the end of it all. It was just so lovely. People that I've, teachers that I had when I was primary school and things like that. It was so special. I just can't put into words how special it was to be here. And
you also mentioned that Monica McInerney helped you out with one of your drafts.
Yes. So she was represented by Curtis Brown, who I was working for. Her name came up on an email. We got in touch because our families knew each other. She lived in Dublin. I lived in London. When I was in Dublin, I went for a coffee and we were talking about it all. And she had a read for me, which was great. And she gave me a lot of praise from that read, and that really, really just spurred me on. Yeah, she's been absolute. She's a star of this place. She's a national treasure.
Well, like Monica, she bases a lot of her novels on the Clare Valley, and you've done so with your first novel, Ennis Creek.
Ennis Creek, as in Ennis Park. It's all Irish, so I still really drove into the Irishness of the Clare Valley.
And you've got the Clare Town Hall, you've got the Middle Pub, Bungaree, you said.
Bungaree, so there's a sheep station in, so I had Bungaree in mind when I was writing it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's good. So, I mean, obviously...
It's not Bungaree, but it's of that.
It's based...
It's of that ilk.
Yeah, that's what you visualised, I guess, when you were writing
exactly.
It. How many years were you based here in the Clare Valley before you left?
28. I was born in Clare Hospital. And my mum had been here pretty much all her life. Dad was a sporting boy, so he's even further out.
So what did your family say when you said, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to get it published and I'm going to travel around Australia on a book tour? Dad, do you want to come with me?
I don't think they ever thought it was going to happen, to be honest. And I don't blame them because I didn't think it was going to happen either a lot of the time. Dad is of that generation of Australians who don't ever really say or express their emotions. I think most people will understand what I'm talking about. But I have never, he'll say to me, I'm so proud of you, I love you. The support and just openness has just been amazing. So for nothing else, if nothing ever happens with this or any other book, I mean, that is just the world to me.
Let's talk about For Everything a Time, which I love the tagline, how do we make peace with the past? It's a brief synopsis, Mark, for someone who hasn't read it, like me. I haven't read it yet. I'm going to read it. For those people that haven't, what's it about? And is it based on a true story or is it totally fictional?
Totally fictional. I'll start with that. It's about two best friends who are finishing high school and then they're involved in an accident, and 13 years later they have to look back and face what happened and just come to terms with the trauma of it all, the effect that it had, and work out a way to move forward. So
speaking of books, is there another book planned for you?
I've started a few. I've got a few ideas. One I've sort of written halfway through, which is set in Ennis Creek again, but 20 years later. Looking at some similar things. Bungaree's now, sort of Mullingar will be a winery. So yeah, it's sort of getting a bit more into that type of thing. But yeah, hopefully.
Just out of curiosity, to be a successful first-time writer, how many books do you have to have sold to then still be picked up by the same publisher? Is there some type of rule with that?
As far as I know, there's no hard and fixed rule. So It would depend on how you've gone, just generally. I mean, they're not going to necessarily think you have to be a bestseller to look at you again, but it will then depend on the quality of your next novel and how well you've done. But just even getting that far in them, they will look at you quickly.
Well, you've already got that reputation.
Exactly. You've done it once, so you can technically, in theory, do it again.
And do you think it's going to be half the amount of time getting published this time because you've been there, done that?
Well, I would hope so. Yeah, I can write a lot quicker than I used to. I don't worry so much about the words. I worry more about the ideas and then do the words after.
So you've got the ideas. So what comes first? The ending? The beginning? How do you start writing?
I either asked two questions. I said, what would happen if, or how did we get here? So if it's a how do we get here, I know the ending and I can work back and I try and work out some type of story. Or the what would happen if, then I'm sort of going forward. I actually find working back easier because at least I know where I'm going to.
Not ready to give up your day job?
I would love to, but not quite yet, no.
And the fact that the first part of the process of being a debut author hasn't put you off and you're willing to give it another shot. You've done your first novel. I mean, has it given you the taste or the desire to just, yep, I know I've done it once, I can do it again, and I want to make this I want to make this my life. Is that where you're heading, or it's just a part-time hobby?
I would like it not to be a part-time hobby. I know that the universe sort of throws a lot of things at you, but even though you have those days where you think, I can't do this anymore, or we were on tour and we were driving, I just can't be bothered with that last bookshop, I'm too tired. And then you go, right, no, I'm going to do it, I'm here. And when you get in, what I've loved about this, particularly this last couple of weeks, is just meeting people and meeting readers and, seeing old friends. But some of the most special moments that I've had is when someone who doesn't even know me has come up and spoke about my book or written a review about it. And, I've had people I don't know messaging saying, you've made me cry. That's amazing. Thank you so much. And I just can't, I get all over the place with it. My big sort of floppy, sloppy heart just goes mad. It doesn't know what to do with it.
Congratulations. It's a huge achievement, and I love your journey and how you got to here in the first place. I think it's fantastic to hear all the background behind the scenes of how to bring a book to life. And good luck with the next one. Looking forward to seeing what comes with the next instalment of Ennis Creek.
Thank you very much. I think I will have a podcaster in the next one.
Well, that'll be exciting.
Exactly.
Mark McAvaney, debut novelist. You can grab his book For Everything a Time, which has been getting great reviews, I might add, online or any major bookstores. And I also believe you can get it from your local library. That's it for another episode of the Clare Valley Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. For further details on council affairs, contact the office or any of their social media channels, Facebook and Instagram. But if there's anyone or any event that you'd like covered on this podcast, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm Annabelle Homer. Catch you soon for another episode of the Clare Valley Podcast. of July at its ordinary meeting.